Welcome, everybody. I'm happy to start off with the opening session of the CoReMA final conference. CoReMA is a research project with the title Cooking Recipes of the Middle Ages. And the conference you're attending is the Culinary Recipe from the 12th to the 17th century, Europe, Islam, Far East. I will only briefly introduce the people you're dealing with. There are, of course, the primary investigators of the research project, which is Bruno Laurioux and myself, Helmut Klug. And during the days of the conference, you will be assisted while asking questions and with other problems you might encounter by Virginie Hullet and Julia Eibinger.
Thank you. So I am Bruno Laurioux. I'm teaching here at the University of Tours. We are happy to welcome you at the first day of our symposium on the culinary recipe. We would like to remind you some important points about this symposium. This symposium will last 2 weeks, 5 days a week, from Monday to Friday, at 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Paris time. Each session will last 90 minutes maximum. Each talk within the session will be of 20 minutes maximum, followed by a discussion. There will also be slams of less than 10 minutes during some sessions, and each Friday, demonstrations of historical recipes. Second point, important, but I suppose you know it, the whole symposium is online. Only the speakers, including the chairpersons of the session, may speak and have their camera open. The attendees can write the questions through the Q&A channel of the Zoom platform. The debates will be recorded and broadcasted the day after through the CoReMA YouTube channel. Third point, and I think you began to understand it hearing me, the official language of this symposium is English. Some speakers who think they don't speak English at all have been allowed to speak in French, but the PowerPoint presentation needs to have been translated in English. You can ask your question in the Q&A channel in English or in French. Julia and Virginie, who help us during this symposium, will collect and, if necessary, translate these questions for the speakers. For technical questions, such as connections, sharing the screen, and so on, please contact Christophe Targer, who asks you to register so you know his mail address. As shown by its title, this symposium is both a conclusive act for the Austrian-French research program CoReMA, Cooking Recipes of the Middle Ages, and also the first step of a broader investigation on the recipe, with a second symposium next year, the recipe number 2, Scientific and Technical Recipes. It will be held probably in the last week of April at Tours, we hope, thanks to the help of the Micrologus Society, the International Union of Academies, and the pollen research unit. Initially, with these partners, we planned a huge symposium, mixing all kinds of recipes that had been created for all kinds of sciences and techniques, cookery, as well as alchemy, medicine, magic, and so on. But the pandemic made this project a little bit more complicated and in fact quite impossible before 2022. Because of administrative reasons, we had, however, to organize the conclusive meeting of CoReMA this year. And that's why you are here, and us too. But what is CoReMA? Let us recall in some words the aim, corpus, and methods of this research program, which is funded by Austrian and French research agencies, that is to say FWF and ANR. It links two different universities, Graz and Tours, and within them two research units, CESR, that is to say Centre d'études supérieures de la Renaissance, and ZIM, Zentrum für Informationsmodellierung, Center for Information Modeling. Our starting point was a threefold observation. First observation, cooking traditions, local and continental, are one of the most recognizable items of European culture and a large part of European identities. Second observation, the oldest substantial evidence on the birth of modern European cuisines, namely manuscripts containing thousands of cookery recipes, first appears in the Middle Ages. Third observation, today we have access to edited cooking recipe collections and manuscripts as digital image, and digital humanities research methods could greatly help to facilitate analysis of a comprehensive corpus of historical recipes. In a preliminary survey, we realize that on the European continent, Latin, Middle French, and early New High German recipes provide the majority of culinary transmission. Therefore, we decided to study this corpus of around 8,000 recipes, more than 8,000, on a total of probably 15,000 recipes if we include the Catalan, Danish, English, Icelandic, Italian, Norwegian, and Portuguese recipe collection. The idea was to test a model that could be enlarged later to other times and spaces. To summarize, the CoReMA project aims at analyzing and visualizing the origin, the relation, and the migration through Europe of the thousands of medieval culinary recipes through the tools of digital humanities that Helmut Klug will expose to you in some minutes. In this introduction, Helmut and I will try to show how some results of CoReMA can feed the question that will be raised during these 2 weeks by eminent specialists of food history. We are happy and honored to welcome them. Some of them are probably sleeping at this right moment in the USA. Other ones have nearly finished their daily work in Asia. This symposium indeed attracts a worldwide audience, and this is the first result we want to note. Don't worry, our debates, as I said, are recorded and the videos will be available on our YouTube channel the next day. I don't want to bother you by enumerating all the topics that we mentioned in the call for this symposium. Let me just highlight the main points. First of all the recipes need multidisciplinary approaches, combining lexicology and history, codicology and philology, textualization and implementation, and as such, their study belongs, broadly speaking, to the history of techniques and culture, as well as to the material or the sensory history. As it appears to the specialist of culinary history, the recipe is basically a material production, which was unwritten or printed on a material support, in or out of a constituted collection. It can be enriched by reading signs, which allow the ancient reader to read, copy, or even use it. Because the recipe is also a cultural production, as the smallest element in which a text can be ultimately deconstructed, as said Robert Halleux, the recipe follows a written protocol that includes a vocabulary, that means the ingredients and the tools, and the grammar, the instructions. Last but not least, the recipe is a practical production. As William Eamon writes, this is normally a list of ingredients along with a set of instructions describing how they were to be employed. As such, the recipe must be distinguished from other kinds of description because it does not exist independently of the process itself and appears as a prescription for taking action, what the Greek philosophy called the poietica. If in the Middle Ages the implementation is sometimes not really the questions, in the last decades, may I say in the last years, it has become a research issue when the development of experimental archaeology suddenly established the restitution as a reliable way to better understand the recipe. In the CoReMA team, we don't pretend to be the discoverers of these new approaches. We benefit from the experience of other teams or other programs, as, for example, the Recipes Project dedicated to food, magic, art, science, and medicine, or the collaborative project of the Folger Institute, Before Farm to Table, Early Modern Foodways and Cultures, which includes transcriptions of recipes. We are convinced that a comprehensive research on the cooking recipes should be conducted not only in comparison with other kinds of recipes and in a multidisciplinary approach, but also in a long-term approach, as Brodel said, and at the scale of the world, or at least of many cultures. That's why CoReMA is very happy to welcome during these 2 weeks early modernists and specialists of Islam and of Asia. Thank you to all our partners in these adventures, in the last years as well as the next ones. In two, I was helped for more than 2 years by Corentin Poirier and Denise Ardesi, and now by Christophe Darger, Virginie Hullet, and Fabian Muller, to prepare this symposium. In Graz, Astrid Bohm, Julia Binger, Elisabeth Raunisch, and Christian Steiner have been and are still working on the early New High German recipe text with Helmut Klug. I would also like to thank Professors Paravicini-Baliani, De Pape, and Veronese for the support of this first symposium, the recipe, and of the next one too. I speak too long and I give the place to Helmut for the first part of our introduction. It was only here the foreword of the introduction. Thank you. Helmut, please.
Thank you. In this introductory session, we want to approach the subject we are going to deal with during the next 2 weeks, the recipe, or even more specific, the culinary recipe. There are several angles from which we want to look at this text type, from a linguistic point of view, from a material point of view, from a digital research point of view, and from a semantic point of view. So the first question to ask, what exactly is a recipe? Bruno already summarized it moments ago. In German linguistics research, cooking recipes are, generally speaking, a descriptive type of text that is aimed at knowledge preservation. It conveys concisely formulated instructions for action. According to Thomas Gloning, recipes are simply descriptive texts, but depending on how they are used, they can easily change into didactic instructional texts. I personally would like to take this theory one step further and suggest that as soon as a recipe is implemented, which means that it is either cooked or maybe just even reflectively read, the character of the text type changes from a simple store of knowledge to an instruction for action. Recipes explicitly as well as implicitly prescribe the execution of coordinated activities. In addition to that, the practical implementation of the text is closely tied to the consideration of basic cultural conditions, such as the individual situation of the recipient, dietary restrictions and prohibitions, seasonal availability of ingredients, and so on. Above all that, the instructions provided in a cooking recipe, which are generally a set of coordinated activities and a sequence of actions, and which often call up implicit knowledge, can be followed by the user of the recipe, or they can be ignored and substituted. Cooking recipes have been around for quite a long time. The earliest recipes have been dated back to 1730 before Christ. They are records on cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia. The earliest recipes are mostly scattered throughout dietary writings, farming manuals, or even administrative records. But Andrew Dolby believes in an extensive ancient cookbook culture, which has been lost over the centuries. The first complete recipe collection is the one attributed to Apicius from the Roman period. The medieval tradition starts with the dietary writings of Anthemus and culminates in the vast cookery records of the 15th and 16th century. So far, so good. But what exactly is a recipe? The modern terms recipe, recette, recept derive from the Latin passive past participle receptum of recipere, meaning to accept, to receive, to take back, which again is related to capere, to take, to grasp, to seize. This is believed to go back to the note receptum, which means received and or done. That was used by the apothecaries to acknowledge recipes for drugs. Receptum can be translated with it has been taken, it has been used, and can be seen as the reply to the instructions provided by physicians for the production of drugs, which generally started off with recipe, which means to take, followed by a detailed list of ingredients. Gradually, the term receptum was generalized, initially only meaning panacea or proposal for a solution in a medical context, and only as late as the second half of the 18th century, it was associated with the domain of cookery, then meaning the manufacturing or the preparation instructions, and this was in the German language. Documentation for the English word recipe associated with medical prescriptions can be dated to 1533. An association with the cookery can be found as early or as late as the first half of the 17th century. The situation for the French language is similar to the English language. From a linguistic point of view, the text type recipe is actually quite boring. It is a clearly defined, straightforward, and highly normative text type. It is said to be an instructive text with descriptive theme and development, where appellative functions dominate. The long history of the text seems to be taken as guarantee for its stability and simplicity. But when comparing a late medieval cooking recipe to a recipe from modernist cuisine, as it is done on my slide here, extraordinary changes become evident so that both these assumptions can hardly be kept up. For obvious reasons, this generalization can neither be sustained for the historical text nor the modern one. There is, of course, a great deal of stability there. For example, the use of verb forms. Research of modern cooking recipe texts has identified at least 11 different grammatical verb forms which can be used to convey instructions for producing either instructive or descriptive recipe texts. These findings can easily be traced back to the medieval cooking recipes. These already reflect the study with a high variance in grammatical use. In linguistics, recipes are not seen as individual oeuvres, and the individual texts are not fixed in their content and form, which can be demonstrated both by diachronic evolution of the text type as well as synchronic evidence. Modern cooking recipes reflect a classical trisection of headline, ingredient list, and instructional text, which cannot be easily found in medieval recipes. But since the Middle Ages, these texts have greatly changed. Where the medieval recipe is only a brief text, often without heading and mostly in prose, generally used as a memory aid, the modernist recipe provides not only a broad context of information, it often also tells a story, and it also conveys most detailed preparation instructions as well as quantity and time measurements and so on. So what for the modern recipe seems clear-cut and straightforward, which by the way it isn't, cannot easily be said for the historical recipe, as the text type is in its early stages of formation. The different recipe texts and the different recipe collections give clear witness to this. The historical texts clearly show their social origins, and there might even be evidence for the mindset of their authors. Historical pragmatics, which is a subfield of historical linguistics, deals with the questions on how people communicated and how context influences meaning. This field of research might be able to support medieval recipe research. For the culturally focused study of historical texts, and especially historical knowledge and practical texts, these external contexts in all their possible forms might be even more important than the actual texts themselves. It is the various cultural contexts that add meaning to the simple set of instructions. To achieve results in this field, research has to concentrate on the phrasing of instructions, on the use of ingredients and tools, on the general focus and design of recipes, as well as at the concept of a recipe collection. So to effectively look at the cultural heritage behind the actual recipe or recipe collection, several preparatory steps have to be taken. The compilation of an anthology for both tools and ingredients for the CoReMA project has raised the need for an in-depth glossary and commentary for these lexical fields. Both ingredients as well as kitchen and serving tools need to be provided in a deeper historical context, from the point of view from several historical and linguistic fields of research. This is also especially true for the preparation and cooking methods handed down through verbs and phrases in the instructions of a recipe. One might argue that individual studies of the scope of text editions or research papers do already provide lots of background material on the lexicon of recipe collections, and one might, to some extent, be right. But our close study of the recipe collections have clearly shown that only in the overall scope of the recipe transmission of that period, such research can be meaningfully be brought to an end. At the same time, these results would form the basis for a broader, diachronically focused study. My personal theory on the origin and interconnection of medieval recipe texts builds upon a general recipe corpus that might have been spread out all over Europe, containing a certain amount of base recipes. Individual recipe collections, of course, include specialized regional recipes, but also recipes taken from this corpus. Examples for such supra-regional dishes are the omnipresent blanc manger with all its regional variations, but also recipes for the preparation of a whole fish in 3 different ways. For the German recipe transmission, comprising 60 different recipe collections, we can state that the general form of text production through compilation or through copying can be verified in only a few cases. Most collections seem to be highly individual products, 3 of which can even be attributed to named individuals. Starting with these collections, text pragmatics should focus on text composition, syntax, and the use of instructions. This research could provide deeper insight into the minds behind the recipe texts and the transmission of recipe collections in general. This could even help answering our initial question, what actually is a recipe? Looking at the manifold evidence in our sources, we will find continuous proof for my theory on the individuality of single recipes and their collections. Each recipe collection has to be regarded as a self-contained historical source with its own peculiarities. Sometimes, even the often minimal order in recipe collections is broken up. If a clear text layout is missing and titles are absent, it is sometimes hard to discern where a recipe really starts or ends. Sometimes it is equally hard to decide if a certain text passage is still part of a recipe or if it can be taken as a recipe on its own. Recipes are handed down in various alternative versions. Several recipes, obviously describing different dishes, are passed on under one and the same title. Another variation is that one base recipe associated with the same title, for example, the blanc manger, is handed down through sometimes very, very different text. What we can hardly find are literally copied recipe titles and recipes. Language and linguistic aspects fail us here, and we need to turn to another discipline, providing a deep insight into culinary transmission, namely manuscript studies, and Bruno will carry on from here.
Thank you. Thank you, Helmut. You're on time. It's supposed to be too, but it would be difficult for me. We have to consider the recipe as a material object that we can identify through a codicological approach. It's not so easy. Creating a standard, it would be a standard descriptive frame of manuscripts was in CoReMA a challenge that is still in construction for the English version. Manuscripts offer so many material, textual, and formal configuration, more than the printed book, it seems. What about the material configuration first? In the corpus of 86 CoReMA manuscripts, there is only one scroll of parchment. It's in the middle of the image. Only one scroll of parchment, which is kept in Switzerland and contain the oldest witness of the viandier tradition. The only other examples in the Western cookbook productions are two copies of another famous tract, the English form of Curie. This kind of disposition was probably not so rare for the medieval cookbooks, as suggested by a sentence added to the Enseignement in one French codex of the very first 14th century that you have here also. The scroll was the usual format for practical documents, as tax roll, also for some liturgical text that needed to be seen by the attendees, or simply by lists like genealogies. What is a recipe collection, or even a recipe itself, if not a list? We know indeed some scrolls for medical recipes too. Most medieval manuscripts that transmit cooking recipes are codices. Thanks to the data we compiled through CoReMA, we will soon be able to complete and correct the statistics on the material support, the dimensions, the numbers of folio, etc. I proposed in my PhD 30 years ago. These statistics, they can give us, along with the record of the decorative elements, precious information on the kind of book production that was engaged in the recipe literature. It seems that medieval people did not use wax tablets to put recipes in writing, as they did for provisional accounts, for example. The formulas that had been developed by cooks, professional or non-professional, were usually transmitted verbally and by rote learning. Putting them by writing could have been exceptional in the Middle Ages and related to special circumstances. For example, a request from the lord who employed the cook and wanted this one to celebrate his splendor, as Amédée VIII, first Duke of Savoy, asked to Maître Chicard in 1420, as you see the manuscript here on the right part, on the left part, the transcription of the beginning. Or another reason could be the need for the butler, scalco, or écuyer de cuisine to keep with him a short description of dishes that allows him to check taste, color, and consistency of what is served to his lord, as it clearly appears in the Viandier of Paris Bibliothèque Nationale at the end, when the redactor, the author of the book, explains that the result must be thick. Or even the professional obligation, another reason, for the doctor to understand what was exactly such and such a dish that has been served to his patient and maybe made him sick, as probably thought Reinbotus de Castro, who served the Emperor Charles IV when he copied and probably translated in Latin the Enseignement qui enseigne à appareiller toute manière de viande, a French cookbook. This translation is now in a copy in the Vatican Library. You see it on the right side of the image. Or finally, also, last reason, the curiosity of this middle-class man of Besançon, who between 1440 and 1450 hastily transcribed a copy of the Viandier, again, with so many mistakes that we can doubt it has ever been used to cook. The printing industry, which began to be interested with cookbooks in the 1480s, is not yet a part of the CoReMA program, not yet. But we can easily remark the persistence of a handwriting production for luxury manuscript copies until at least the 1530s, and for personal recipe notebooks for much longer. Studying early modern cookery or even cookbooks without studying manuscripts can lead to mistakes. Now I show a manuscript, a luxury manuscript, which is in a private library. We don't know where exactly now. Let's say some words now about the textual configuration after the material configuration. Nowadays, as a written production, the cooking recipe is frequently part of a collection of recipes that we can name cookbook. Of course, recipes can also circulate independently through word of mouth, publication in newspapers and magazines, and of course, internet. This dual circulation probably existed in the Middle Ages, except, of course, the magazines and the internet. But we have kept only the written recipes, and among them, those which were part of a cookbook are the very majority. However, this collection of recipes could hardly fill a complete volume. In other words, the real cookbook that we know today is quite rare in the late Middle Ages. Even if, due to a progressive accumulation of recipes, homogeneous collections became significantly more numerous in the 15th century. One important choice of the CoReMA program is to work also on isolated recipes that can be discovered in the margin of another text or of another kind of text, or added as a noture at the end of the manuscript. The results are disappointing so far because most isolated recipes that the catalogues of libraries reported are in fact medical and not culinary. When a gathering of recipes seems to appear inside a collection, we can call them embedded recipes. It is the case, as it seems, in the oldest collection of medieval cooking recipes that Charles Gasper, who discovered them in a medical manuscript, will present during this symposium. Another case can also be found in a manuscript of the National Library in Paris, here, with a mainly religious content. Sometimes the integralment of cooking recipes and other kinds of recipes is so tight that we can talk about mixed recipes as here. It's not very clear, sorry. This is the microfilm, which is really in a poor condition, but you see the second paragraph at Pisces Frisandos, maybe you see, and it's culinary recipes. Third part of this point of this part, the formal configuration. The diversity of what we call the collocations between cooking recipes and other texts reflects the diversity of readers. Because of the peculiar education and relationship to reading, the books are different. The layout can be very structured, as in a university exemplar, like in the left part. This is the manuscript of the Vatican Library we saw just a minute ago. The layout can be very structured, as in a university exemplar with reading sign that allow to quickly find the hierarchy of the knowledge, even if the limits of recipes have nearly disappeared, as in this Vaticano physician collection. Some books are obviously standard production of a workshop, like the Bruxelles Ménagier de Paris, which was made in Paris. But some cooks are personal copies, with a very simple layout and non-standard handwritings, like the Registrum Coquine, now in a private library, which was copied hastily and glossed by a German reader. I thought I show an image of the Registrum Coquine. Maybe I forgot. Yes. So the Registrum Coquine, now in a private library, the same as the Italian manuscript that we saw some minutes ago, was copied hastily and glossed by a German reader, maybe the author himself, John of Bockenheim. How can we manage to both take this extreme diversity of recipes into account and to overcome it? This is one of the main issues of the CoReMA project and explains the crucial place that the digital humanities play in this project. So this is Helmut time.
Thank you. I want to provide a short overview of what I decided to call digital food history. I will try to summarize how digital technology and research methods have been utilized during the last decades and what is state of the art in digital cookbook research. During this conference, other people will give in-depth presentations on the possibilities digital humanities methods pose for our field of interest. The internet, and with it the digitization of knowledge, has been a boost for ambitious cooks. One of the oldest websites dedicated to cooking is chefkoch.de, which holds over 300,000 German cooking and baking recipes, and the website dates back to 1998, the early days of the public internet. 1 year even earlier, chowhound.com started out as a message board for food lovers and cooking enthusiasts to exchange their knowledge. But the benefits of technological advancement are not limited to home cooking or online communities. Digitization has also been a great boost for culinary research. Even very early on, manuscript images, digital texts, and digital research papers have been available. So what is the status now? Besides cat pictures, cooking has become one of the biggest hypes of the user-generated internet. This is probably why you can also find lots of material related to historical culinary research. People are interested in cooking and culinary history. The range of material is manifold. In the beginning, recipe collections of various origins and languages were available in plain text. One of the first, and maybe the best known, is Thomas Cloning's Monumenta Culinaria et Dietetica Historica, which provides texts related to culinary history up to 1800. The sources for his texts range from personal transcriptions to redigitized print editions. Scholarly editions have not so easily found their place on the internet. Unfortunately, they have been banished to the book. In the CoReMA project, we are the first to publish historic cooking recipes as a digital scholarly edition. This lack of representation on the web is unfortunate because engagement with online resources is much more common for the public and for scholars nowadays than with print editions, as the former are more easily accessible to them. The potential for public engagement with culinary research is unusually high, as it has a very close connection to daily life. Sustainable cooking and tradition are central topics in our modern society, and culinary history therefore of great interest to many. The fascination with culinary heritage motivated libraries early on to publish their manuscripts and collections in the form of image files or themed collections. One of the first to emerge was the cookbook platform at Graz University Library, initiated by Hans Zotter, the head of special collections. Today, many digitized manuscripts are available open access through XIIe services of modern libraries, which allows for automated research approaches. With the advent of the Web 2.0, emerged blogs dedicated to the history of cooking. Scholars have taken up this activity, and 2 blogs dedicated to the recipe are, for example, the Digital Recipe Book Project or the Historical Cooking Project. Blogs generally accompany research projects. They are used to document research and teaching activities, or they are an easy means for researchers to publish thoughts and texts. Last but not least, there are several databases dedicated to historical recipes. The topics range from bibliographic databases over recipe text collections to the recently published mother of all recipe databases, the Sifter. This database holds various metadata information on recipes, including the ingredients, from about 5,000 cookbooks and also medieval manuscripts, thanks to the CoReMA project. During the last year, even the fiercest critic of digitization probably has realized that having access to data via the internet is not so bad. As convenient and useful as it is, digital culinary history is quite more than just browsing faraway library catalogs and accessing digitized manuscripts. Due to a broad public interest, these historical documents can also be used for citizen science activities, as several public transcribing projects of culinary history-related material prove. What's on the menu is an internationally renowned project, but also smaller libraries like the Upper Austrian State Library in Linz provide transcription interfaces for user interaction. With transcribers, as the probably best known software for automated handwritten text recognition, the digital humanities provide aids and applications that can be used to digitize huge amounts of text and make it available in different data formats for further digital research. But digital text is quite useless unless it is enriched with further markup and annotations. The TEI, the Text Encoding Initiative, has models for general text markup. The CoReMA semantic model builds upon those and provides an annotation model specifically for recipe texts. The model is designed in a way that it can be used not only for cooking recipes, but for all kinds of recipes from different domains. It is, of course, suitable for recipes from different eras and geographic domains, geographic regions. The basic reason for annotation is to add meaning to some kind of data so that it can be used for further analysis. In the CoReMA semantic model, we not only mark up the macro and micro text structure of the cooking recipes, but we also mark up individual information on ingredients and tools. This is achieved via semi-automatic annotation scripts, which are based on a lexicon of spelling variants we all know historic languages provide. Many questions that can be asked about recipe collections can be answered with similar automated software scripts that perform queries on the data. Both annotation and analysis can, of course, be assisted by artificial intelligence systems. Norm data vocabularies, schema languages, and ontologies provide the means to enrich texts in a way that individual resources can be connected via the internet. Provided research data is made available open access, it becomes and interchangeable. This way, different resources can be combined and data corpora can be built. The advantage of this approach is the generation of large amounts of data suited for automated analysis. The disadvantage is that knowledge generation is still restricted to the cognitive work of individuals. The idea of the semantic web is to actually utilize computers to generate knowledge. Data is not only connected just via the internet. Both data and their connections are enriched with meaning using semantic web technologies. This is meant to transform our existing web of documents into a web of knowledge. The CoReMA recipe data, the ingredients and tools, is compiled this way and integrated into the linked open data cloud via Wikidata concepts. For the historical cookbook research, this opens the gates to a fantastic new universe. The Wikidata concepts function as a hub between different knowledge domains. With this technology, it was, for example, possible to build a database of flavors based on the ingredients used in the medieval recipes. Digital research also provides the easy means to visualize data and research results. These visualizations can, on the one hand, be used as an entry point into data collections, as it is done on the CoReMA website with the language map or the time chart of cooking recipe collections. Visualizations of research results generally support knowledge generation. So can, for example, the radar charts with flavor information you can see now on this slide be used as a distant reading approach towards the historical data. Word clouds of flavor data shout out how a recipe would taste if prepared with today's ingredients. For the visualizations, you can see here, we used a mustard recipe. This has been a short overview of the emergence of digital food history with only a few select examples how digital humanities research methods can be utilized for culinary history research. The future of digital food history lies in the semantic web. As researchers, we need to provide data that can be integrated into the linked open data cloud so that we can start crossing borders into other scholarly and scientific domains. For the recipe and the recipe collections, more digital data as well as the interconnection with other domains would mean more ways to analyze and classify. This would be of great help in understanding the various meanings of the recipe, its development, and its change over the centuries.
Thank you. Thank you, Helmut. The last part of our introduction will be the question of semantics of the recipe, the semantic approach, or another way to say that is how to understand the recipes. The questions are those of the cultural history, which are not exactly identical to those of the history of culture. We can identify three main issues in this area: classification, dissemination, and implementation. First question, the problems of classification. Is it culinary or not culinary? A few minutes ago, Helmut Klug showed that the definition of the culinary recipe has probably changed from the Middle Ages. Beside this diachronic outlook, taking a synchronic point of view seems useful too. How can cooking recipes be differentiated from medical or other technical recipes in the Middle Ages. The case of some border recipes is particularly interesting. They surely have a food content, but not necessarily the canonical form of the cooking recipe. Ingredients and tools as vocabulary, instructions as grammar. We find them even inside the cookery books. The Viandier, one of the most spread culinary collections, opens classically on 2 tricks for cooks, explaining how to remove an excessive salty or burnt taste. As I will develop next Thursday, more sophisticated recipes intended to cause surprise, but with a culinary basis, found the place in the books of secrets during the 15th and 16th century. And I will show this chart, but translating in English next Thursday, I promise. A session of our symposium will be dedicated also to confectionery recipes, which gave rise to special collections, more or less related to medical literature, but that we find also isolated or appended to other works. Same case for the recipes supposed to improve or even make wines, as here. Interestingly, some of them are written in the margin of one very important manuscript. This manuscript contains indeed 3 major cookbooks of the 14th century, the Tractatus and the Liber de Coquina, followed by the Enseignement. Second point, this strange cookbook entitled Tractatus de Preparandi et Condinendi Omnia Sibaria begins with a long chapter on the preparation of drinks, mostly wine. And third peculiarity, this codex, now Latin number 7131 of the Bibliothèque Nationale, was owned and partly copied by Henri de Mondeville, King Philip V's famous surgeon. So this is very interesting to study these wine recipes in the margin of this manuscript. It needs to be done. The complex and close relationship between cookery and medicine were the subject of a fierce debate in food history of the medieval West. I am happy that no less than 2 sessions are dedicated to this topic, whose Antimus treatise gives a good idea as early as the 6th century. But thinking that medieval cookery is medicine in action seems very naive. Historians have to carefully distinguish pharmacological recipes that include food considered as a medicine from medical cuisine, as the Petrus Musandinus tract on dishes for the sick persons, and medical aspects of cooking recipes when they import vocabulary and consideration directly from medicine books. So it's a large area, and we will have 2 sessions to see these questions. Second point, dissemination. We could imagine that the thousands of cooking recipes coming from the Middle Ages have extensively irrigated society of the time. Thanks to archaeology of manuscripts, we know some of the readers. Exceptionally, we can see how they appreciated one passage, such or such a recipe. We find recipes everywhere in the medieval time, even in the tombs, like the one of an Infanta of Castile. But these recipes are not usually cooking recipes, unfortunately. From the 12th century on, literary texts of all kinds, comical, theatrical, poetical, linguistic, narrative, did not stop talking about food. They gave lists of foods, names of dishes, menus, but almost never a recipe. The only exceptions I know of are the following. But maybe you will find other. Please tell me. First example, a partridge, quail, and lark pie described by Gas de la Bugne, a contemporary of Taiwan, who interspersed banquet scenes in his hunting treatise. Second, maybe I have a dia. I didn't check. No dia, sorry, I forgot. Second, I wanted to do it, but second, some lasagne and macaroni to be prepared by a merchant on the move for his business and copied in the Manuale di Mercatura at the beginning of the 15th century in Italy, of course. And third, the famous Ballade of the Spiteful Tongue, Ballade des langues ennuyeuses in French, that François Villon inserted in his testament in 1461. The famous poet explicitly presents this ballad as a recipe. The term is here, the word is here. Not the English word, of course, not a French word, but a Latin word. The poem is in French, but the word recipe is in Latin. Villon explicitly presents this ballad as a recipe and pretends to have searched in vain for it in Taiwan book. If the syntax is clearly the one of a cooking recipe, the ingredients are far to be edible. Washing liquid of leper's legs, feces and urine of a Jewish woman, and cat brain are mixed with the dangerous byproducts of alchemy and other techniques as arsenic, orpiment, and quicklime. According to a recent commentator, this is really, I quote, a disgusting recipe. Nothing to do, however, with the macaronic literature that flourished in Italy during the 16th century when Teofilo Folengo published 20 culinary recipes in Latin, Doctrinae Cosinandi Viginti. Doctrina is another word in Latin to say recipes. Folengo published these recipes in a mix of Latin and Italian, in fact. This is what we call the macaronic Italian or the macaronic Latin. Last point, implementation. Here we try to go from the words to the facts, or even to the acts. This approach is probably the most innovative. 40 years ago, when I began to work on medieval cookery, the reconstitution was considered by the medievalists at best as after symposium fun. I am struck by the place that these questions occupy in our symposium. One round table and one session, and of course, 4 demonstrations of historical recipes. This happy evolution is the result of 3 factors. First, a new method in the history of science and techniques, which tries to associate knowing and making in the construction of research itself. This real co-construction, illustrated by the eponymous project in Columbia University, is also a collaborative one. This is a project of Professor Pamela Smith. Second fact, food archaeology has begun during the last decades to appropriate the cookery, not only through the ingredients that can be now easily identified and characterized by archaeozoology, paleobotany, and isotope analysis, but also by returning to the ceramics and detecting traces of cooking in or out of the pot. I'm happy to count Aurélie Chantron, who is a practitioner of experimental archaeology, among the PhD candidates I supervise. It's also the case of Fabien Müllers. Thanks to his long and rich experience in the field of restitution, he will explain to us how to combine artifacts and ecofacts in a scientific approach. Thank you, and now Helmut will conclude.
Thank you, Bruno. And for the conclusion of this introductory presentation, I will just shortly summarize what we have talked about. We have only scratched the surface of the research of medical cooking recipes. We have tried to approach the topic from different directions by looking at linguistic aspects and defining the textual dimensions of the recipe. We have emphasized the importance of materiality in historic research by highlighting codicological and manuscript studies of recipe collections. We have situated the recipe research and food history research in the realm of digital humanities by providing an overview of digital research approaches and by questioning the different dimensions of meaning and understanding that are inherent in the recipe. All of this paves the way for the nearly 50 presentations, discussions, slams, and demonstrations that you will have the possibility to attend over the next 2 weeks. As Bruno said in the beginning, all sessions will be available on the CoReMA YouTube channel, so you can receive sessions you missed, or if you want, you can watch some of the sessions again. For more information on the CoReMA project, please visit either the blog or the project website. You have the URLs presented on the slide. If you want to tweet about the conference, the presentations, or any interesting stuff you come across during the next week, and which is related to the symposium, please use the hashtag CoReMA conference, CoReMAconf. So for now, we are happy to answer questions, and we would love to discuss any comments you have regarding our introductory presentation. But we are also ready to answer any of your questions regarding the organization of the symposium. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature of your Zoom.
We have one question. Yes. From Hiso Klinionia, does semiotic interpretations belong to your category of semantic?
You mean the semiotic as a science? You mean the symbolic, etc., the representations through the semiotic science? Is it the case? Maybe this person can precise what she or what he means by semiotic interpretations. Science of the signs, if you want, semiotic. But this is really a precise science for me. So what does he mean, or what does she mean?
So maybe the other attendee wants to, would like to specify his questions. Meanwhile, we do have other questions in the Q&A.
Yes.
Michael Brauer asks, first, thank you very much. How would you define the relation between recipes and other matters in manuscript collections, Ménagère de Paris, Buch von guter Speise? They have legal, medical, housekeeping, etc.
Yeah. Maybe I can answer for the Ménagère de Paris, if you allow me, Helmut. I can answer. Ménagère de Paris is really a specific, peculiar book with no other example. In fact, we don't know exactly how it was compiled, by who and when. And he presents it as a kind of domestic encyclopedia. But in this domestic encyclopedia, there is moral parts. There are moral parts, and there are also economic parts, as we can say, in the Aristotelian sense of the world. And this is to care about the house economy. The link between these two parts is a kind of story. We don't know if it's true. The story is that he is old and his wife is young. So she will become quickly a widow, and he try to help her to manage her house. That's why there is cookery, there is gardening, there is other parts which are very interesting, and in fact, they are never studied completely, really completely. That means searching, for example, the references, the sources of this passage. So it's not exactly a cookbook, the Ménagère de Paris. So in the first time, we hesitated to enter the Ménagère de Paris in the CoReMA project, in the CoReMA datas. But finally, we did it because inside this book, there is hundreds of recipes, and it would have been stupid to let them outside the research. But it is really a specific book. We don't know exactly the circumstances, the real circumstances of its compilation. We know that some contents are linked to Paris, but mainly the Ménagère de Paris was known in the Burgundian states, and not in the 14th century, but in the 15th century. So really, it's an interesting text. I don't know if that's a question.
We have a few other questions now. Andy Hook says, a very interesting introduction, thank you. Are there many other groups of academics researching medieval recipes to the same level as CoReMA? Thank you.
I don't know of any other groups of academics researching medieval recipes. There are individual endeavors like the blogs I introduced during my presentation, but at the moment I do not know of any research projects.
Okay.
Thank you. Gaius Gasper asks, thank you for the excellent presentations. How do you account for the preponderance of 15th century German material amongst the culinary recipe corpus as a whole?
It's also for Helmut.
Yes, and again, I have to admit that I have no idea why there are so many German language recipes in the European medieval recipe corpus. Bruno?
I have an hypothesis. It's not all the case, but often inside what we call Hausbuch, that means a domestic book, which developed in the German areas in the 15th century, in towns, mainly in towns, in the south of Germany or the Rhine area. So it's a cultural fact, I think, and cookery is inside. Maybe also they were not destroyed as they were, for example, in France, with the destructions of many cookbooks, not only during the Second World War, but also before, when the secularization of the church properties, and or with the immigration and with the religious war during the 16th century, there were many manuscripts that disappeared. Maybe it was also the case in England, where there were many manuscripts still present in England now. And the German case is to be considered as the French case, the English case, to my mind. And in fact, also it was people who collected these books that create the possibility for this book to be not destroyed, because a cookbook is linked with a practice. Why not to destroy it if the practice disappeared? This is a question, of course. The reason to not to destroy it, it is, for example, it has a good, it's of good quality, written in a real, very beautiful parchment, etc. But it's very rare. I know only 2 or 3 examples of this kind of book in Italy, mainly. The other thing is that, and this is a question for Giles, is that it's inside a book which with other aims. For example, a medical book. A medical book can be useful a longer time than maybe a cookery book, because the medieval medicine that was built on the roots of the antique medicines go on until the modern time. So you can use these books, and inside these books there is sometimes cookbooks. Giles asked us why there is cookbooks inside medical books. That is useful for physicians themselves. They need to know the real cookery to use cookery and food as a medical mean. Food for the medieval medicine and early modern medicine, it's still right. This is a way not only to keep the health, but also to fight the disease. So it's very important to a doctor, to a physician, to know really the food and to know really the cookery. That's why he needs to have a cookery books for himself. This is my opinion. There's many questions now.
Yes, there have a lot, but two people ask the same. You mentioned the fact that many recipes are presented in works related to medicine. Is it a link to the theory of mood or not?
I've already answered to this question. For me, it has nothing to do with the fact that cookery is functioning with the theory of humors. I don't agree with this question, but we can have a discussion, a long discussion like this. But it is because physician needs to have cookery recipes to do their work. For them, it's very important to have cookery recipes.
So next one, Yuxun Sunra asks, thank you for this wonderful information. Is it CoReMA project trying to include Asian recipes and of medieval and early modern area only?
Yeah, this is of course our aim. We will have to in this symposium a session with Laurioux and also Hélène Jawara-Piner and other specialists of Islam. So the Arabic recipes should be in CoReMA one day. CoReMA or other program working with the same principles and the same tools, of course.
And another question about extension of CoReMA program is Cecilia Chevalier. In addition to formal receipt, does we field of receipt also include literary source of information? For example, chronicle, description, banquet, accounting.
Yeah, but with the specificity of CoReMA is to work on recipes. So where there is recipes, we take. If it's not recipes, it's just kind of mean of interpretation of the recipe. But our main material is recipes. Do you agree, Helmut, with this?
Yes, of course.
We have a suggestion by Mary Hyman. In England and Germany, if I'm not mistaken, cookbooks were closer to household management texts, including preserving recipes and other practical recipes, often written at least ostensible by women. In France and Italy, for example, cookbooks other than the Ménagère, par exemple, were court cookbooks written exclusively by men.
Mm-hmm. Dear Mary, I agree with you for the early modern period. You're right, but not in the medieval period. We don't see any cookbook written by a woman in the medieval period, or maybe you have found it one in Germany, Helmut, but because I know Sabina Velzerin. Sabina Velzerin is...
yeah, but I would date her in the early modern period. For the medieval period, which we conclude at 1500, we have in our corpus of 60 recipe collections, one collections that we can actually attribute to a woman. So it's 1 out of 60. And yeah, for 59, we do actually not know who wrote it and why it was written, who wrote it.
This is interesting. This copy made for a woman or by a woman. It's an exception and needs to be really carefully studied. Thank you, Mary, for your suggestion. But it's true in 16th century and 17th century in England and in Germany.
Yeah, and what I want might to add to this as answer to the suggestion by Mary Heeman, in the Middle Ages, all the recipe collections, the German recipe collections, are equally called cookbooks, or they are cookbooks from monasteries. They only a very few, I think 3 to 5 out of the 60 can be attributed to lower households.
So the two last questions are the same. Huh? This is I already answered this one.
Yes. So I think if nobody else has any further questions.
Thank you for this.
Just in time.
No other question? No?
No.
Yeah.
So
okay.
we can finish quite in time. It's
quite in time.
3 minutes past half an hour to 12.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
This afternoon, there is another session out of the East. So, please.
we will be seeing you then. Thank you again.
Thank you to everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you later. Bye.